Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a topic that is, well, profoundly personal. And frankly, it's one of the most critical philosophical challenges for men stepping into the second half of life. We're talking about redefining success, redefining identity, really, after 50. And this isn't just, about planning your retirement finances. It goes much deeper. It's about finding that fundamental reason to get out of bed every morning when the old ways of winning, well, they just don't seem to apply anymore, do they?
That's exactly right. We are diving into what a lot of our sources are calling a moment of reckoning.
Hmm.
It's that inevitable point, really, where the structures that defined your identity for decades, maybe your career success, your role as the provider, your status, even your physical peak, they start to shift. And it often happens unexpectedly, and it's always powerful when it does. So we're looking at sources today that give us a pretty comprehensive philosophical roadmap, but also a practical playbook for, navigating this transition.
Yeah, we're targeting that heavy feeling, that emotional and sometimes existential weight. That sense of being directionless, maybe unfulfilled, even after you spent years dutifully checking off all the big societal boxes. The career milestones, hitting financial stability, raising a family.
Yeah.
You accomplished the mission, right? So why does the celebration, if there even is one, feel so hollow?
Well, because the mission itself might have been incomplete. Or maybe just not your mission deep down. The goals you were chasing were often externally mandated, weren't they? Focused on achievement, maybe status, but not necessarily authentic purpose. So the mission of this deep dive is, I think, crucial. We want to help shift your perspective, moving away from feeling intimidated by what looks like a blank, maybe even frightening canvas of the future, and towards feeling genuinely inspired by it. Our sources, they really define this phase not as some kind of decline or an endpoint, but as this enormous opportunity. An opportunity to, and I quote one here, grow, thrive, and build a different life paradigm. It's really a chance to move toward what some call second spring or even a second youth, but this time fueled by all that wisdom you've accumulated.
Okay, and the whole framework we're going to use today, the one that aims to provide that intentional renewal you mentioned, it really revolves around one core philosophical idea. Getting this distinction changes the map completely. We absolutely have to grasp the difference between the life you might have lived so far and the life you're actually meant to live going forward. This is that fundamental shift. The one required to move from what the author David Brooks famously called the first mountain to the second mountain. Honestly, if you only internalize that one concept today, this deep dive will have really served its purpose.
Absolutely. Let's unpack what that actually means. And maybe we should start with why the need for a new framework feels so urgent for so many men right now.
Okay, so let's start with the hard part, the often painful truth. Why does this upheaval tend to happen in the 40s and 50s? We often use that term midlife crisis, don't we? But our sources really emphasize it's probably more accurate to call it a profound transitional period, a passage maybe, not necessarily a breakdown. So what are the common triggers? What delivers that first, often severe jolt of reality?
Well, the triggers are frequently these massive, often unavoidable life events. And they serve as this kind of brutal reminder that, despite what we might have believed in our youth, we're not immortal. The sources point very consistently to health issues first and foremost. A sudden health scare, maybe a harsh diagnosis, or even just that steady, undeniable decline in physical capability. That's a profound encounter with mortality, isn't it? The body just isn't recovering the way it used to. Stamina might be diminished. Maybe it's bad knees, chronic pain, things that prevent those physical feats that perhaps once defined a sense of youthful vigor.
And that physical aging process, I mean, that can be deeply distressing because for so many men, self-worth was tied maybe inextricably to physical stamina or performance or even just brute strength. Losing that physical identity feels like a massive psychological wound.
It absolutely is. That internal sense of self-reliance can diminish, and that just feeds the uncertainty. Now, couple that internal decline with the external life triggers that often hit around the same time, destabilizing the environment. The classic examples, of course, are things like job loss, or hitting a career plateau after decades of chasing the next promotion, or even just facing the sheer difficulty of retirement when your entire identity was wrapped up in your professional title. Divorce, too, is another major destabilizer. It forces this total reassessment of life choices, often creating deep regret and making it really hard to forge a path forward.
But there's one you mentioned, maybe the most insidious because it often just creeps up quietly, the empty nest syndrome. I know it sounds like a bit of a domestic cliche, but the sources treat it as a massive existential trigger. When life suddenly stops revolving around the kids' activities, the tuition payments, their schedules, that newfound freedom, it can feel deeply uncertain. And sometimes, frankly, terrifyingly silent.
That's silence. That's the key word there. The roles that provided such absolute definition, the executive, the primary earner, the hands-on coach and father, they're either diminished or maybe gone entirely. Men often realize, looking back, that they structure their entire lives around their children's needs and futures. And once those children leave, it feels like the structural pillars of the house just disappear. The question they're suddenly facing is, okay, who am I now that my primary purpose seems to have evaporated?
And this uncertainty, it's especially acute for those high achievers, right? The ones who strictly define their self-worth by career success. Our sources highlighted this really devastating phenomenon. They called it what happens when the applause stops.
That phrase is just incredibly descriptive, isn't it? Because it speaks to this fundamental reliance on external validation. These men didn't just work hard. They were often accustomed to constant feedback. The quarterly reviews, the awards, promotions, praise from clients, from their teams. At the peak of their careers, they had this whole organizational echo chamber sort of celebrating their performance. Then, when they step away, or maybe even just shift roles, that whole energy just dissipates completely. And that leaves this void, this sense of profound disconnection and quiet. And it's something many men dramatically underestimate the impact of.
But why does the silence hurt so much? I mean, isn't success supposed to provide some kind of internal security?
It should, ideally. But if the foundation of that success was, let's say, brittle, maybe based more on status than on deeply held values, then the scaffolding just collapses when the external validation goes away. Many men, unfortunately, fail to build an internal life that can actually sustain them without that external structure of work. They never really developed deep hobbies or nourishing friendships outside of work or practices that generate inherent joy. So when the career momentum stops, they suddenly feel, redundant.
Okay, so when this foundational self-worth starts to crumble, what are the telltale symptoms of discontent? Or maybe the negative coping behaviors that start to show up in men in their 50s?
Well, we see a pretty predictable pattern. Usually it starts with internal discontent. Things like feelings of general dissatisfaction, maybe persistent anxiety, and crucially, often a complete lack of motivation. It looks like apathy. They start withdrawing from activities they maybe once enjoyed because they just don't see the point anymore. Or the joy. There's this sense of drift.
And that apathy, it often turns into reactivity, doesn't it? Those sort of classic impulse control issues we sometimes associate with the crisis.
Precisely. Impulsivity and poor judgment can become these desperate attempts to just recapture feeling something, anything. And this often manifests as excessive, sometimes rash, spending, buying that expensive sports car or the boats they can't really afford, or maybe gambling, increasing dependence on alcohol or other substances, or, sadly, sometimes engaging in reckless behavior like affairs. They're desperately trying to find a quick fix, seeking that instant gratification to mask the underlying spiritual and emotional pain. But unfortunately, these actions, they only provide temporary soothing, right? And they usually generate massive negative collateral damage in the long run.
So what's the deeper thing going on here? The underlying existential struggle that's driving this kind of behavior? It's clearly more than just boredom.
It really is. It's this grappling with fundamental existential concerns about the value, the meaning of their entire life path up to that point. The sources really stress that men frequently start, revisiting the past, getting hung up on old decisions and feeling regretful. There's this powerful tendency to romanticize and idealize the past. Maybe their bygone youth, their peak physical condition, or career success. In doing that, they inadvertently devalue the immense potential that the future still holds.
That's a really profound observation. If you spend all your energy looking backward with regret, you effectively incapacitate yourself for moving forward, don't you?
Exactly. And the core issue often is this sense of complacency, maybe conformity, and ultimately redundancy. They achieve the success that society told them they must chase. They climb that mountain. But then they get there and find that path turned out to be, less fulfilling than they expected. They solved beautifully for success and achievement on that first mountain, you see. But they completely failed to solve for authentic fulfillment and genuine meaning. And this is precisely why that philosophical pivot we talked about is absolutely non-negotiable.
Right. This brings us perfectly to that philosophical pivot. The one needed to escape that suffocating cycle of regret and apathy we were just discussing. We've established the problem. The old metric of success was flawed, or at least incomplete. Now we introduced the solution, this powerful concept of the two mountains. So tell us more about that first mountain, the one most men spend their first 5 decades trying to climb.
Okay, the first mountain. Think of it as the conventional external path to success. It's fundamentally practical, it's often quite formulaic, and it's really focused on self-improvement and self-focus, building yourself up. It's defined by pursuing tangible accomplishments. Hitting career milestones, achieving economic stability, building a strong family unit, gaining social recognition, that external applause we mentioned earlier. It's kind of the checklist life, isn't it? Graduate, get a good job, get married, buy the house, get promoted, send the kids to college. Check, check, check.
It's the life of accumulation, essentially. Accumulating money, status, things.
Precisely. And the key observation made in the source material, the really critical one, is that while this mountain is often essential, I mean, it provides security, structure, a foundation, it is fundamentally insufficient for deep, sustained happiness. Even those highly successful individuals, the ones who reach the absolute pinnacle of their careers, they often realize that scaling that first mountain, it just doesn't solve for authentic purpose or lasting joy. And here's the kicker. Climbing higher up the first mountain, say, earning even more money or winning yet another award will never get you to the second mountain. You actually have to climb down, regroup, and start climbing something entirely new.
Okay, so the second mountain isn't just a higher peak on the same range, it's a radical reorientation. What is that reorientation fundamentally about?
The second mountain represents the deeply personal journey. It's centered on genuine fulfillment, on purpose, and on contribution. So if the first mountain was mostly about the self, about me, the second mountain is about self-transcendence. It's about finding deeper meaning by devoting yourself to something larger than your individual ego, maybe a cause, a community, a key relationship. It's about building a life paradigm that's truly rooted in your authentic inner values, moving away from just achievement and towards dedication, towards service.
Okay, that sounds fantastic, but maybe a little abstract for someone feeling stuck right now. How do we practically start climbing that mountain? The sources suggest a major shift is required first, moving from what they call an outcome-based life, focused on hitting specific targets, to an identity-based life, and that starts with clarifying a vision.
Yes, this distinction, vision versus goals, is absolutely foundational teaching for this stage of life. See, goals are typically specific, they're measurable, often short-term. I want to run a marathon, or I want to save X amount of money by age 60. They focus on changing outcomes. A vision, though, that's the overarching narrative. It's more like a fluid, adaptable moral compass. It dictates who you are becoming. It defines how you want your life to feel day to day and what principles are guiding your actions.
Okay, so if the goal is, say, to write a book, the vision behind it might be something like being the type of man who shares his accumulated wisdom through storytelling. The vision dictates the identity, and the goal is just proof of that identity.
That's the perfect way to frame it. That's the shift in perspective. Your vision has to be rooted in your core values. It means really answering the question, okay, looking ahead, what is the highest and best use of my time, my experience, my energy for the next 20, 30 years? And it also must fundamentally include your legacy, not just what you owned or achieved, but what you contributed, what you shared. When your daily goals, your actions, align with this clear overarching vision, the pursuit itself feels different. Less like grinding work, more like effortless, meaningful stepping stones.
And does developing that clear vision also act as a kind of counterforce against those paralyzing feelings of doubt and apathy we talked about earlier, the ones that keep men stuck?
Oh, absolutely. It's the necessary armor against what some sources call the resistance. The resistance is that formidable, really insidious foe of self-doubt and those limiting beliefs that whisper so loudly, especially to men in midlife. Things like, you're too old for this. You should have done this a decade ago. It's too late now. You've earned the right to just coast. These beliefs, they just stifle progress and create inertia.
Yeah, we've all heard that internal voice, haven't we? The one that tries to rationalize settling for less than we're capable of.
Exactly. And having a clear, value-driven vision acts like your force field against that limiting belief system. It reminds you that, yes, the clock is ticking, but not as a source of anxiety. Instead, it's an urgent mandate for intentional action. The vision provides the reason why you must move forward despite the resistance. It shifts the energy from what do I have to do, which feels like a burden, to who do I need to be to achieve this meaningful future I envision. And that, right there, is the difference between simply aging and actually evolving.
Okay, so we have the philosophical framework. Now climb down from the first mountain, start ascending the second with a clear vision. Now we absolutely must transition to the heavy lifting, the practical application. How does a man in his 50s actually execute this pivot without feeling completely exhausted by the prospect of starting over from scratch? The sources make a really critical distinction here, don't they? Reinvention should be seen as an evolution, a transformation, not some kind of eradication of your past.
Yes, and this is a huge psychological relief for many men. Because you look at this idea of a second mountain, and the initial thought might be, oh my God, I have to burn down my entire life, quit my job, sell the house, move to a remote ashram.
Mm-hmm.
That impulse, though, it's often driven by panic, not by thoughtful strategy. True reinvention, the kind that lasts, it starts from exactly where you are right now. It's about leveraging the immense capital intellectual, social, emotional that you've already accumulated over decades. Think about it. You have this considerable baggage, as one source puts it, of experiences and skills. Things like project management, complex problem solving, the emotional intelligence honed by raising a family or navigating office politics, maybe specific technical knowledge. This isn't stuff to throw away. This is your foundation for the next chapter.
So we're not throwing away the playbook entirely. We're just rewriting the rules of the game, maybe, using the existing players but in new formations. But to make lasting change, the sources insist we have to start at the very deepest level. Identity. Why is changing identity considered more important than just changing behavior?
Because behavior ultimately is a symptom of belief. Your current behaviors simply reflect your current identity. If you believe deep down, I am a disorganized person, well, you'll likely behave in disorganized ways. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So to achieve lasting, profound change, the kind that can sustain you for the next 30 years, you have to fundamentally change who you believe you are at your core.
Okay. And what are the steps for making that foundational identity shift? Is there a process?
The process itself is actually pretty simple, conceptually.
Yeah.
But it demands radical self-honesty and, frankly, relentless discipline. First, you have to consciously decide the type of person you wish to become. And this needs to align directly with that new second mountain vision we talked about. For example, you might decide, okay, from now on, I am the man who prioritizes his health and vitality. Or, I am the man who contributes positively to his local community. It needs to be an active statement of being.
Got it. Decide who you want to be. And step 2.
Step 2 is critical. You must then prove this new identity to yourself. And you do that with small, consistent, undeniable positive action steps. Every single day. Consistency beats intensity every single time in this phase of life. Forget the grand gestures for now. The goal is to systematically collect evidence that supports this new identity narrative you're building.
Right. So if I decide my new identity is the man who prioritizes health, I shouldn't immediately sign up for an Ironman race tomorrow, because that just sets me up for likely failure and reinforces the old first mountain outcome-based way of thinking.
Exactly right. You'd be falling back into the old pattern. Instead, start with the smallest possible act that proves the new narrative. If you want to be physically active, maybe commit to just a 5-minute walk immediately upon waking up. No excuses, just 5 minutes. If you want to be the man who is well-read, maybe commit to reading just one single page of a book before you even think about checking email in the morning. Those small wins are absolutely vital because they build internal belief, they generate momentum, and they directly combat that narrative of decline that the aging male psyche can so easily adopt.
Okay, beyond this really foundational identity shift, what are some actionable daily strategies men can use? Strategies to impose this new kind of structure that combats that feeling of aimlessness that often leads to apathy.
The primary tool recommended across the board is radical, intentional calendar utilization. Think about it. In your first mountain phase, your calendar was likely jam-packed with reactive obligations, right? Stuff driven by others' meetings, client demands, kids' sports schedules. To break that cycle, to actually achieve self-priority, you have to consciously build sacred space in your calendar for yourself. How does that look, practically speaking, for a guy who still feels incredibly busy?
You literally schedule your workouts. You schedule your focused hobby time, maybe learning guitar or woodworking. You schedule quality family time. And crucially, you schedule empty open space blocks of time with nothing assigned. And here's the key. You put these things in first. Make them non-negotiable appointments with yourself before you schedule the professional or external obligations around them. This intentional approach elevates self-priority from just a vague wish to a hardwired routine. And don't underestimate that open space. It's essential. It allows for creativity, for contemplation. It prevents you from simply defaulting back into those old reactive high-stress habits. I really like the idea from the sources about using a what-if mentality, sort of gently kickstarting long-term change without that paralyzing pressure of having to go all in immediately. It seems to lower the stakes.
It's a fantastic technique. It's really the art of using small, low-stakes questions to break through inertia. So instead of overwhelming yourself with a huge thought like, oh God, I have to write a novel, you just ask yourself, what if I just wrote 50 words today? Just 50. just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Or maybe with communication habits. What if I tried responding to emails only once a day, say at 4 p.m., instead of reactively jumping on every notification?
Hmm.
This kind of experimentation allows you to build those new mental muscles gradually without triggering the massive fear of failure that often accompanies those big First Mountain-style goals.
Okay, finally, in this section, we have to address the working man's dilemma. That strong desire many feel to just quit the corporate job entirely, check it all in to follow a passion. The sources have some pretty strong cautionary advice here, don't they?
They do. They refer to that impulse to just summarily quit a stable career in midlife as potentially galactically irresponsible, especially when you consider midlife financial obligations, maybe mortgages, college funds, retirement savings. The smart second mountain strategy isn't usually about subtraction, about quitting. It's more often about alignment, about integration. You look for ways to combine your existing profession, your hard-earned skills, with your emerging passion or purpose.
Can you give us some concrete examples? What does that kind of integration actually look like in practice?
Sure. It means finding less risky, but often equally rewarding ways to apply your passion within or adjacent to your current structure. Let's say you realize your emerging passion is really teaching and mentorship. Instead of quitting to become a life coach overnight, maybe you could ask to transition into an internal consulting role in your company, or perhaps dedicate time to training new hires. Or if you discover you have a deep passion for the environment, maybe instead of starting a risky new green business venture from scratch, you could leverage your financial skills to serve on the board of an established environmental nonprofit. You see the pattern. You're transitioning. Maybe from being the primary actor, the star player, to being the leveraged contributor, the experienced mentor, the wise advisor, using your accumulated power differently.
Okay, we've built the structure, we've started shifting the identity, but now we have to turn inward. We need to focus on the internal work, that emotional, maybe even spiritual component that's absolutely necessary to sustain this renewed life path. Because peace, as our sources define it, isn't some kind of reward you get after achieving something on the second mountain. It seems to be more of a byproduct of inner alignment, of self-forgiveness.
Exactly. We're moving into the realm of what we might call peak mental health. And that's not a static state, it's a dynamic journey. It's about living authentically, being ethically integrated, and acting graciously towards yourself and others. And this is where we really have to confront that deep, often heavy, emotional baggage that we've inevitably accumulated over decades, often decades spent in competition and focused solely on achievement.
And the core tool, the sources suggest, for dealing with all that psychological baggage is grace. Now, that's a concept that can often feel a bit foreign, maybe, to high-achieving, action-oriented men.
It can, yes, but grace, as defined here, is simply a gift of kindness, of empathy, of compassion, and critically, of forgiveness directed both towards yourself and towards others. For men who spent their entire lives judging performance, constantly evaluating their own and everyone else's, learning to apply grace is radically transformative.
Yeah.
Think about it. Without grace, you remain chained to past negativity, don't you? You can't forgive your own past failures, maybe that poor investment choice, the times you neglected your family because of work, those harsh words you said that you can't take back. This lack of self-forgiveness, it metastasizes. It turns into self-resentment, bitterness, cynicism. Grace is what allows you to acknowledge the failure, yes, but then to learn the lesson from it, extract the wisdom, and fundamentally grow beyond it, rather than being defined by it.
And part of practicing that grace involves actively releasing those past burdens. The sources talk about closing open loops. I think many listeners might not even realize how much mental and emotional energy these old hurts or unfinished business are constantly consuming in the background.
Oh, they consume massive amounts of psychological energy. They create this persistent emotional drag, what one source calls psychological friction. It slows you down. An open loop is basically any piece of unfinished personal business. It could be an unspoken apology that you know you should have given to a spouse or a child years ago. It might be a lingering resentment towards a former boss or colleague who you feel wronged you. It could even be an abandoned high-stakes hobby that you still feel guilty about quitting. Or maybe a major life project like that half-finished basement renovation that's just been sitting there undone for 10 years, subtly draining your energy.
So closing these loops requires a conscious choice then, a choice to let go of the grudge or the regret or the feeling of failure associated with it. Sounds difficult, maybe, but necessary.
It is absolutely essential for moving forward freely. You have to first acknowledge the existence of the loop, name it. Then you work to extract the necessary lesson. What was the data point here? What did I learn? And then you must decisively, consciously release the associated emotional baggage. Now, this isn't about denial. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's actually an act of emotional sovereignty. You're basically clearing out the old junk drawer of your psyche to make room for peace and for the considerable energy that's required for that second mountain climb.
Let's talk about authenticity and integration. This sounds like the bedrock, the spiritual grounding needed for that lasting fulfillment we're aiming for. How do we achieve that kind of internal congruence?
Well, that spiritual grounding, as you call it, it's achieved primarily through self-knowledge. And it seems to involve three interconnected stages or practices. First, you need to be awake. And awake here means being really open and rigorously honest about what principles and values are truly important to you personally, not what you think should be important. You have to slow down enough to actually listen to your inner self, to determine, do I genuinely value contribution, family connection, intellectual pursuits, maybe solitude and silence? What truly resonates?
Okay, be awake to your values. And the second stage is being thoughtful.
Right. Thoughtful means actively checking for misalignment between those stated values and your actual behavior. It involves asking yourself, do my daily actions actually correspond to these values I claim to hold? And also, did I truly choose these values for myself, or were they just sort of handed down, maybe by my father or my corporate culture or the expectations of my social group? For instance, if you say you deeply value family time, but you find yourself constantly checking work emails throughout dinner every night, well, you've got friction there, haven't you? Thoughtfulness is the process of identifying that gap without judgment initially.
And the third stage is being curious.
Yes, curiosity. This means approaching self-evaluation without judgment. Like a scientist observing data, you treat every discovery, especially the friction points or the mistakes, as a neutral data point, not as evidence of moral failure. You ask, that behavior didn't align with my stated value of health? Why was that? What was going on there? The culmination of these three being awake, thoughtful, and curious leads to integration. And integration is simply walking your talk. It's aligning your deep, authentic values with your daily behaviors until they flow together, almost effortlessly. That deep integration is the definition of inner peace and authenticity in this second mountain phase.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to some practical mindset shifts, daily things that can fuel this inner work. The first one, and perhaps the most important motivator for change at this stage, is cultivating curiosity.
Curiosity is the absolute engine room of reinvention. It truly is. It's probably the #1 fuel you have, and it also acts as a natural deterrent to fear. Think about it. When you are genuinely curious, eager to learn new things, explore different skills, maybe try out a new community group, you stay mentally agile, you stay open-minded, it keeps you vital. This stage of life is perfect for dedicated lifelong learning. Use your experience as a springboard. Maybe audit a college class just for fun. Take an online course, a MOOC, in something completely unrelated to your career. Or simply make a point to explore a new park in your city. Or try a different type of cuisine. Incremental curiosity feeds the spirit and keeps you moving forward.
And to really find out what truly lights you up, as you said, you probably have to consciously let go of some of the obligations that might have defined your first 5 decades.
Absolutely. You have to intentionally, rigorously ditch the shoulds. It requires auditing your entire life, your commitments, your routines, even your relationships sometimes. And you reframe every lingering feeling of obligation by asking, okay, but what actually lights me up? What truly matters to me right now at this stage? This intentionally shifts your focus away from just adhering to external expectations, which, let's face it, probably caused a lot of the first mountain misery, and towards generating genuine internal joy and authentic engagement.
And finally, let's touch on the immense power of practicing gratitude. How does that play into securing this internal alignment and maintaining that sense of vitality we're talking about?
Gratitude is absolutely critical because it fundamentally shifts your emotional center of gravity. It moves you away from scarcity and longing, which feed apathy and resentment, and toward a sense of abundance and contentment right here, right now. It's about deeply, consciously acknowledging the good that is already present in your life, even the seemingly small things. And the sources recommend giving your appreciation a sensory dimension. Don't just mentally list things you're grateful for, actively savor them.
What does that mean, giving gratitude a sensory dimension? What does that look like in practice?
It means slowing down and consciously using all your senses to experience the good thing. So don't just gulp down your morning coffee while scanning the news. Take a moment. Savor the warmth of the mug in your hands. Smell the aroma. Really taste the depth of the flavor. Or don't just glance at your child or your partner as you rush past. Take a second to truly look at them, see them. Feel the depth of the connection. Maybe notice the sound of their voice, This kind of embodied practice grounds you firmly in the present moment, and it has this amazing power to transform those lingering negative feelings, regret, anxiety, dissatisfaction, into positive, immediate contentment. It rewires your brain, essentially.
Oh,
Okay, so if the second mountain journey is ultimately defined by finding fulfillment and purpose, then the destination, the summit, if you will, is about finding meaning through contribution and through consciously defining your active legacy. This is really where all that wisdom, the network you've built, maybe the financial stability you accumulated over the first 50 years, this is where it becomes truly transcendent, where it has served something beyond just yourself.
So legacy here moves beyond just, say, leaving a financial inheritance or having a list of past career accolades on your resume. It's much more about a forward-looking, active impact you choose to make on the world around you. How does a man go about crafting that kind of profound vision of legacy?
well, he's encouraged to actively move beyond just reflecting on past achievements. The suggestion is to actually write a legacy statement.
Hmm.
Think of it as a personal philosophical document that defines not just what you want to be remembered for, but crucially, how you actively want to help others or contribute to your community going forward. This statement then becomes an integral part of that overall life vision we discussed back in part 2. It ensures your focus naturally transcends purely individual desires and locks onto contribution, contributing to something that feels larger and more meaningful than just yourself.
This sounds much more like a re-engagement with the world rather than a withdrawal from it, which is how retirement is sometimes viewed.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. The real power of contribution is that deep purpose and lasting fulfillment are found not so much in achieving more for yourself, but in dedicating sustained, leveraged effort to something that genuinely enriches the community and simultaneously feeds your own spirit. You're shifting from a competitive mindset, how do I win, to a much more collaborative and generative one. How can I help? How can we build this together?
What are some specific avenues of service or contribution that really allow a man in his 50s or 60s to best utilize that unique accumulated experience he possesses?
The key is leveraging your specific, hard-won professional skills in service roles. For instance, if you were a financial executive, maybe you could volunteer your time to mentor young entrepreneurs in underserved communities, or perhaps serve effectively as a treasurer for a nonprofit whose mission you believe in. If you were, say, a logistics expert, maybe you could volunteer to help manage complex donation flows for a humanitarian aid project. Other avenues include taking on a specific social cause that resonates deeply, maybe mental health support or literacy campaigns or environmental advocacy. Or if it's appropriate and feasible, maybe launching a small nonprofit or even a small business venture that is explicitly aligned with your deepest values and aims to serve a particular need. The point is, you're taking your lifetime of knowledge, your graduate-level understanding of how the world works, and putting it to work for generational benefit, not just personal gain.
Now, before we wrap up this idea of purpose and legacy, we absolutely must reiterate that foundational piece, the discipline necessary to sustain this kind of grander vision. Because you simply can't climb that second mountain, no matter how inspiring the view, if your base camp is crumbling underneath you.
Absolutely non-negotiable. The foundation is, and always must be, your physical and mental health. This is one of the most crucial lessons many learn, sometimes the hard way, in midlife. With good health, and that means consistent, appropriate exercise for your age and condition, pristine sleep hygiene, proper nutrition, and actively nurturing your mental and emotional wellness, then you possess the necessary energy, the vitality, the resilience to actually go out and pursue that grander vision. There's a saying, if you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams. If you neglect your health, you really only have one dream to get your health back. Health truly is the prerequisite for all meaningful second mountain endeavors. Full stop.
And finally, relationships. They seem to take on an entirely different weight, a deeper significance in this phase of life as well.
They absolutely do. They often shift from being part of the background infrastructure of life to becoming vital life support systems. And these relationships, they require sustained, conscious, daily effort to truly nurture those bonds with loved ones. We know that loneliness is a significant challenge for men as they age, particularly for those who are maybe hyper-focused on career for decades and let other connections wither. So you have to actively invest. Invest time and energy in deepening those existing bonds with partners, children, old friends through shared experiences, through vulnerable and proactive communication. And also consciously work to expand your social circle. Engage in new group activities, maybe join clubs that align with your new passions or interests. Actively foster that sense of belonging and seek out emotional support. Because the second mountain, unlike perhaps the first, is never climbed alone. It's a team effort. Hashtag tag tag outro. The entire journey we've really outlined today could be summarized, I think, pretty simply. You have likely solved brilliantly for conventional success on that first mountain. You achieved what you set out to achieve, or what society told you to achieve. But perhaps you discovered, maybe painfully, that success alone does not equal fulfillment. So now the task is different. Now you must solve for authentic fulfillment. And this transition, this climb up the second mountain, it isn't about just waiting passively for some sudden overwhelming feeling of motivation to strike you like lightning. It doesn't usually work that way. Instead, it's about making a series of conscious, intentional decisions. Deciding the identity you truly want to embody, maybe the man who contributes generously, the man who lives graciously, the man who embodies health and vitality. And then crucially, proving that new identity to yourself day by day with those small, consistent action steps. Every single day matters.
Yeah, the second half of life, it's really not a forced retreat into obsolescence. It's potentially an incredible evolution, one that's built upon the rich, vast foundation of experience you already possess. It truly is an opportunity to reclaim simple joys, to finally align your deepest values with your daily behavior, to craft an existence that reflects your truest internal compass, free, perhaps for the first time, from the crushing weight of external expectations that likely defined your first mountain climb. It really is time. Time to move from the life you were perhaps told you should live to the life you feel deep down you were always meant to live.
And that leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, our listener, to take away today. If the first half of your life was largely dominated by a quest for external applause, for career recognition, the noise of the crowd, then what quiet internal act of service or creation or connection will you commit to tomorrow? Just one small act, an act that proves, really only to yourself, your profound commitment to becoming that purposeful, fulfilled man you are now actively choosing to be. What's that first step going to be?